go. So, welcome, Dan. Delighted to have you on this interview today. Basically, returning the compliment from when you interviewed me way back when, which we think was sometime during early lockdown.
Yes.
When you interviewed me for your excellent podcast about redundancy. And obviously, the world has changed as we know it since then in many ways. So introduce yourself, Dan, and then we'll sort of take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. Really glad to be able to return the favour. I'm Dan Reed. I have two hats. So I have a day job. I head up digital and platform delivery at Barclays, working in the B2B payment side of things. So it's a very much marketing, technology, data role. But then my other hat is I started a company last year called Career Dad. So very much trying to balance the books, so to speak, in, I want to perform very well in my day job and also pursue that as a career, but also want to build something up on the side too.
Right, brilliant. So we have a lot in common then, because we both got two hats. But I'm intrigued, as you know, Dan, I'm a huge fan and thought leader in the world of portfolio careers, which was my last book. So I'm interested in how the Career Dad concept came about.
Yeah.
What was your initial thinking, and maybe where's it morphed or evolved to now?
Absolutely. So I'll try and refrain from turning this into a pop psychology kind of podcast, but I think for context, it's useful to have some background. So my parents divorced when I was quite young, and I was 8, and I think retrospectively that had a bigger impact on me than I probably thought that it did. And the reason it's relevant is because what that meant is growing up as a young kid and a teenager and young adult, I knew that I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to create this stable family unit that I didn't have. And when I say young, I mean as a 10-year-old, I would be thinking about this. So quite strange, really. And then fast forward, I met my now wife at university. So we've been together for quite a while. We have 2 kids together. And I always, when I hit my mid-20s is really where I started to, I guess, shift gears in terms of my career. Up until that point, I'd say bumbled along. I was happy to leave a job after 4 days because I didn't like it. I was really happy to pivot and go, this interests me, now it doesn't, I'm going to move over here, this interests me. And it's when I joined Barclaycard in 2013 that I went into this huge organization and found that I was actually quite good at working with people, getting buy-in for things, and also getting a job done, and realized that was enabling me to get promoted, which, is a completely separate conversation. So I had such imposter syndrome around, getting promoted for almost being a nice person. Obviously, there's more to it than that. But I then started getting promoted, which meant I was working more in London. I started doing some international work, working around the UK, which I loved. But it was at the time where I had my son, he's now 6, and it started taking me away from family. And the thing that I really struggled with is I wanted to create this family unit and be a present dad, because I didn't really have a present dad in my life growing up. And then it was my choice to not be present because I was doing this career thing. And I really struggled with that. And that manifested into guilt and anxiety and feeling like I was letting everyone down and not knowing how to verbalize that. So I just doubled down on the work because that's what I was good at. And that just exacerbated the situation. And I guess where it really came to a head is last year, just before Career Dad was formed. I had my daughter. So she's now 14 months old. And I had, I said not go through pop psychology, but over the last few years, I've had therapy. I've had very strong mentors that have really helped deal with a lot of the guilt and anxiety. And I've had great conversations with my wife. We're on the same page. So when my wife, when my daughter was born, we had an unplanned home birth, which again is a separate conversation. And it all obviously happened very quickly. Now, the day that my daughter was born, our managing director was coming up for a meeting with me. We were talking about some new opportunities for me work-wise. There was a big project that I was working on going up to the CEO, and it was very exciting from a work perspective, and it just stopped. And that was fine because we obviously had a new baby. But, 3 weeks of paternity leave, and after, the first week of kind of getting your head around it all, and, I say I do the classic walking around the house holding a baby, trying to get it to sleep, and you're just going round in circles. I thought, oh, I'm going to send a few emails. I'm going to see how people are getting on, because work's social for me as well. How are people doing? And the messages that I got back when I did get a response were, you need to take this time off from work. You need to support your wife. You need to be the best husband and father you can be. And I was thinking, hang on a minute. I'm very much capable of walking in circles and, texting. And I just felt to be made out to be a kind of a bad guy. And it just didn't resonate with me. So I kind of looked to the internet and looked at kind of working dads as what was out there. And there were some things that were either comical buffoon dad who can't get anything right, and as well, that's not really, think of the Homer Simpson of dads. That's not really me. And then it was a lot of things out there were around work-life balance, how basically work is this nasty, horrible thing you have to get through to enable you to enjoy your family. I was thinking, that's not me either. I actually really like my job. And so I just kept battling with this career and dad. And, I summarize it as, I want to do the school run, but I want to go to that meeting in Germany. They're not mutually exclusive for me.
Yeah.
So I created this video for LinkedIn and said, I'm just thinking of this thing, and the words career and dad keep coming together. Does it mean anything to anyone? Put it out there into the world. And yeah, my inbox was just littered predominantly from dads saying, I know what this is. You don't have to explain. You say career dad, I know that tension. Yeah. I know that pull. And so that's how it was formed. And you talked about the evolution. It started off as a LinkedIn group. It was just, let's create a space where you can talk around, oh, I haven't had sleep in 2 days and it's really, really hard. But I also want some tips from someone because I'm preparing for an interview. It's that space that combines careers and fatherhood. Now, as you say, it's evolved from a LinkedIn group. We still have the LinkedIn group and Facebook groups and all of that good stuff. But, we have now monthly at the moment, virtual hangouts and meetups. There's a website, podcast, and also the business side of it is that I do work with companies to help them engage dads at work, whether that be through speaking at corporate events, whether that be workshops on how to coach line managers to mentor, virtual and remote teams, which is now more popular than ever. But yeah, it's definitely a journey.
I mean, I find it fantastic, Dan. I love what you're doing. And, I remember when I first came across your work, I thought, wow, this obviously as a career coach, it's another angle of that. And, albeit I'm quite a bit older than you, it's still the same journey. I had that same guilt feeling when our kids were growing up. And I always remember Saturday mornings when my wife went back to work for the first time, and she used to work on a Saturday, and I'd be looking after the kids, and invariably the kids would be on their own in the lounge amusing themselves, and I'd be working at my desk. And I remember years later thinking, that was so wrong. That really was wrong. And I'm not sure I had guilt feelings about it at the time, but I certainly did afterwards, probably when I transitioned and started my own business. I get all of that. But when you started this venture, Dan, in your wildest dreams, did you ever imagine how it would evolve in this way?
No.
Or was it just a bit of fun?
It's a bit of fun, and it's funny because I've always, because it is a Career Dad Limited is a limited company. We're on Companies House. It is a registered company, but I kind of describe it as a hobby that I occasionally get paid for. because that's how I see it. I think that in terms of did I sit down and go through a list of, ooh, here are some money-making ideas, what could be a good one? No, I just thought there's a resource that I would benefit from and it doesn't exist. So I'm going to create it, and almost a bit of, you know, a bit of therapy almost for me, get my you know, thoughts out there, and then it just so happens it kind of resonates with other people. And you know, people say to me, you know, what's the plan, where do you want to see it in 3 years, where do you, and you know, this might not be the right answer, but I genuinely don't know, because I just do things because I enjoy them. And yes, there is a bit of it now where, you know, I now have a mission statement, I have a goal that I'm working towards, but it's a very open-ended goal. It's not so the goal is to positively impact as many dads' lives as possible. The reason there's not a number attached to it, or I just think as soon as you hit that number, then what? You just make up another arbitrary number. Whereas, you know, to have something that is a never-ending quest, but where that helps is when I do a talk, especially if it's a free talk. So I do a lot of work for free as well, because of this being, you know, not my main job.
Yeah.
I can look to that mission statement and go, does this impact that mission statement? And if yes, then more often than not, I'll do it. If no, then I won't. But I never thought this is where it would, you know, a few weeks ago, I interviewed the founder of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. You know, I've got two, the podcasts coming out of the next few weeks are two gold medalist Olympians. It's like, I never thought I'd be speaking with these people, and our connection is our roles in wanting to pursue our careers, whatever they might be, and fatherhood. It's nuts when I think about it. Yeah,
I think it's absolutely brilliant. And what you're describing here, Dan, is you know, certainly you're talking about a mission statement, but this is really about your values, isn't it?
Yes,
it's about being true to your values, which you know, in my book, is one of the most important things in the whole career aspect. I always say that everything builds from your values in terms of your career. Unless you're being true to your values, then how can you possibly have a fulfilling working life?
Absolutely.
So I think it's great what you're doing. But what about this other hat then with Barclay Card? I mean, how do they feel about you know, this career dad? I mean, you know, I mean, in terms of your online brand on LinkedIn, I mean, you know, you are really storming it.
Thank you.
And your daughter clearly is a star of
yes.
video.
We can talk about that. Yes. It's an interesting one. So, you know, I've signed all the necessary paperwork that says that I have interests in other, because this is, you know, I say I'm a director of a limited company, so I have to make sure that I'm going through all the necessary due diligence and all of that good stuff. But they're really supportive, because I think that as long as I'm not ever representing or pretending or implying that I'm representing their views, which I never would, and I'm not, you know, like in this context, I'm able to talk about Barclays and Barclay Card because they're part of my career and we're talking about careers. If you were to ask me on, you know, paternity leave policies and all of that, it would be steering a conversation in a different way. But no, that it's they've been great. You know, that the employee advocacy team at Barclays, I work quite a lot with those. I had pre-pandemic, I had a film crew around at my house for a day, and they were filming, you know, here is Dan who heads up our digital, but he also does this career dad. And, you know, they want to show that they are a supportive, inclusive company, that because a lot of what enables me as quote a career dad is flexible working, is that, you know, again, pre-pandemic, that I can really set my own stall. I don't, when I'm in London, that's you know, I'm out the house a lot, but then when I'm in Northampton, I don't have meetings before 9:30 because I want to take my son to school. And then
that's an area I'd like to explore a bit more, Dan. So you're based in Northampton, are you?
Yes, I am. So based in Northampton, and my typical, again, I keep saying pre-pandemic, my typical working week was 2 days in Northampton, 2 days in Canary Wharf, and then a day from home.
Right. So that must have involved a lot of hours and a lot of travelling then.
Yeah, I think so. And it's funny because I have quite an unpopular opinion, which is I really miss the commute, as in the commute to
Yes,
London.
I saw your post the other day about that.
And I know, you know, for a lot of people, working from home and not having that commute has been a fantastic improvement to their lives. And absolutely, I think the thing that I focus on is individualism.
Yeah.
For me, the commute is a time where, yes, I was leaving the house at 6 in the morning, but then I was on trains and tubes for 2 hours, reading, writing articles, listening to podcasts, listening to me, just having my own time. For 2 days a week, I knew I had 4 hours within those days where I could do whatever. I mean, within the confines of a train carriage, I could do whatever I wanted to do.
So it's
And I
almost
don't have
personal development time.
personal development, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Or, you know, playing video games. It's just time to, you know,
me
the
time.
only thing that the only thing I couldn't do that I would have wanted would have been some sort of exercise. I'm sure, you know, running up and down the train wouldn't have gone down. But, you know, that is something that I really, really miss,
So
in what
how did it then suddenly? I mean, it must have been a massive challenge for you in many respects when
yeah.
suddenly the world changes and we're into lockdown and you're confined in your house in Northampton. You know,
Yes,
what suddenly changed for
I
you?
think, yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the before going into the change, I think there's a couple of things that I got incredibly wrong, that I think are important. And I think the first is that I saw this, it was a bit novel, because if you think back to before we went into super lockdown, it was, you know, my kids both had a temperature. So we were advised to self-isolate for a week as a family. At the end of that week, work was saying, we're gonna move everyone out of the offices for a couple of weeks. So I thought, oh, I'm just get to work from home full time for 3 weeks. That's quite novel. That's quite fun. Obviously, you know, 8 months or whatever it's been, 6 months down the line, it's a very different story. But I think because of that, because I saw it as a bit novel and I saw it as working from home, which I was used to in some capacity, I just carried on in the same way that I always had. So, and that was wrong, because I saw it as a form of flexible working, because that's what working from home had always been. Now, this has been the least flexible working that we've ever had. It's been mandated working from a fixed place. And I have found that incredibly difficult. And I think with the schools, you know, the schools closing as well at that time, it was just hard. So trying to, you know, do my day job ramped up because, you know, we call centers were being closed down, so we had to build out a lot of digital capability incredibly quickly. I think there was a 10-day period where I worked about 12 hours a day for 10 days in a row, and it was exhausting. And then at the same time, the family, you know, I'd say my kids are 2 meters underneath me, and I wasn't seeing them. I was having to be on calls at 8 o'clock saying, if I need 5 minutes, or I'm not even have interacted with my kids today. And that was incredibly tough. And yeah, mixed with the schools, and, you know, just linking back to that commute, I no longer had that time for myself, because, you know, I described it as, simplifying it, as I went from dad mode at 8:59 to work mode at 9, and there's no transition. And people were
Mm.
saying, why don't you, you know, book out half an hour before 9 o'clock to do some meditation? Thinking, are you nuts? Like, what are you, if I just say to my kids, can you just let me meditate? But it doesn't, you know, it doesn't work like that. So
Yeah,
yes,
I
that
mean,
was hard.
it's been really fascinating seeing and hearing different stories of people during lockdown. There's some hugely challenging,
Mm.
you know, and I've got a number of clients who in similar situation to you, where they've got young families and they're not used to having everybody at home at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, was your wife working at home then?
Yeah, so at the start, so she'd been on maternity leave. So that was that was a blessing, and also it was quite hard for her because with my work, we went back to a very 1950s model. So I worked and she was at home running the house and looking after the kids, doing the cleaning, doing dinner, and because she was on maternity leave, it was almost an excuse to do that. There was no question of how it should be done any differently.
Yeah.
She went back to work. I say back to work, working from home, 3 weeks ago. So the first week of that was terrible. I think we both cried quite a bit. It was just incredibly hard. Now we're into a much better, and I think as well, I sort of said to her, look, you're going through what I went through 6 months ago. So we can work on this together. And also I know that it will get better. This is just week 1. Let's get through it. And now we're in week 3. She's downstairs on calls. I'm upstairs on calls. Both the kids are out the house. It's much better.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's fine when you got the space, but I've come across many people who don't have that same opportunity, especially if they're in a small flat and they don't have an upstairs and downstairs and enough rooms. So you got all of a sudden, all the family are pretty much crammed into one room, 2 of them trying to work and juggling all the balls at the same time.
Well, and that's, it's a really interesting point because I haven't mentioned my wife works for a competitor. So yeah, right. So it's like, we do very, very different jobs, but I'm sure that, there would be, concerns would be a strong stretch, but there are not situations where you would have 2 people working for different financial services companies working in the same space. It just wouldn't really happen. So that's quite interesting. But you're right. I'm incredibly lucky that I've got my dedicated space. I've got my whiteboard on the wall. I've got a standing desk. I've got lights. I've got a sofa behind me. I'm really, really lucky. My wife does feel like a second-class citizen because she's just perched on the sofa. We converted my son's bedroom a bit into a second office space, but the Wi-Fi doesn't quite reach that far, so she opts for the sofa. But yeah, I mean, for people who don't have that, or for people who are I was speaking to a colleague yesterday who's flat sharing, nightmare, absolute nightmare.
Yeah. And so, with all the kit you've got for your podcast and so on, that's obviously helped you. How much digital stuff did you have in the house before lockdown?
Yeah, so quite. I mean, I'm quite a techie kind of. I really like my gadgets. So we were quite. We've got super fast broadband. We've got Wi-Fi extenders, although clearly not to everywhere. I've got, as you say, I've got podcast mics. I've got good HD cameras. I've got big, I've got TVs as second screens. I'm pretty set up. The only thing that I have bought, so my standing desk I bought about 4 months ago because I just thought this is going on for a while, and also I could already start to see the world of work post-COVID as not being 4 to 5 days in an office. So this morning I've been on calls since, a lot of my day job is calls. I've been on calls since 9 a.m. But I can pace around, I can stand up. I only really sit down if I'm doing kind of document writing or anything. I find that easier. So that's been a real game changer. But again, it was quite a big investment to make. But that's the only thing that I've brought in.
Well, it's two key areas I'm interested in before we finish the interview, Dan. The first one is around your podcast and the reach you've got for that and the sort of people who interact with you. And we mustn't finish this interview without your thoughts on the future of the world of work, because that is another angle where we both have a great interest, I think. So when you started the podcast, was it you and sort of one man and his dog sort of thing, or
yeah, absolutely. So again, we talked about there was a LinkedIn group that evolved into a website, 'cause my background's website. So fine, I think I probably should have a website. And it was only when I started speaking to a few people who were interacting as part of career. I don't know what the collective noun for career dads people are, but you know, someone said to me, "Oh, you should do a podcast. You could get people on to share their stories." And I thought, I don't even listen to podcasts. What are you? You know, I'm a bit behind the curve there. And then I did start listening to podcasts and thought, oh, this is because I listened to talk radio more than kind of musical, and I thought, oh, this is I understand this. So yeah, when it started, it was just me. And I was just knocking on kind of friends and colleagues' doors who I knew were somewhat career focused or had a job that they were interested in, and also were parents. So, you know, one of the very first ones was one of my oldest friends, a guy, James Ward, who is a pilot for Emirates. And, you know, we grew up, I've known him since I was 5, but he's got this amazing, you know, he always wanted to be a pilot. He's now doing that. So we wanted to talk about that, you know, and it's funny, isn't it? Because, you know, sitting down with someone you've known for 30 years and you've never really had a proper deep conversation around where did that drive come from? How did you know? And then, you know, how did you have your son and then move to Dubai? Because obviously Emirates in Dubai. And how was that taking the kids away from the grandparents? Then you've also had another son in Dubai. How was it having a child in the UK versus a child in Dubai? You know, and you think, man, there's some really good conversations here. And it's interesting because as the podcast has evolved and it's got wider reach, as I said earlier, I'm getting guests on now who are, you know, I wouldn't have thought that I'd have the opportunity to speak to, and that's fantastic. And for me,
how do you get them then? Do they come to you, or
they
you?
come to me.
Really?
They come to me. So I think there's I'd say 90, well, I'd say they come to me, or they're referred's probably the wrong word, but they're introduced to me.
Yeah.
So there was a guy I had on called Paul Trudell Payne, who's an American guy, and he and his husband adopted. So he was talking about growing up as Mexican in the US and as a gay Mexican in the US, and then adopting, and he adopted an African American baby. So he's got a lot. So we talked about that, and he said, "Oh, I need to introduce you to this guy Eric Swanson. He's called Mr. Awesome. He's like an international keynote speaker." I spoke to him, and Eric kind of runs this mastermind group where it's, you know, we've got Frank Shankwitz, who founded the Make-A-Wish Foundation. You've got you know, the Olympians who I kind of referenced, and so it kind of spreads and spreads and spreads. So I think I haven't reached out for someone to be a guest in months and months, but now I also have created my top 100. So, and I mean, there are people on there like Barack Obama, right? So I'm going big, like, but I've got my list of people who I want to speak to, and I'm working on, you know, trying to get them on the show. But for me, it's a real blend of, yes, I want inspirational stories. I want people who are of public interest, but I also want those real, you know, what I'd say average, I don't want to call anyone average, but, you know, those average Joe stories. I want the real, you know, true life stories. And for me, it's a real blend between the two.
So do you know what your listenership is, if that's the right term?
Yeah, so and again, this was quite frustrating because I was pre-pandemic, I was getting up to around the 200 listens an episode mark. Pandemic came in, and obviously with the audience that I have, I think a lot of people were listening on the commute, and it literally halved overnight. And now it's built back up to kind of that pandemic stage. So around when an episode goes live, they go live every Monday, I get around 70 to 100 listens on the day or over the next, and then it kind of trickles on as the week goes out, which I thought, you know, I'm kind of grateful for I think the fact that a single person is interested in what I and another human have to say is quite fascinating. But you never really know what those numbers mean. Is that good in terms of the podcast world? Is it bad? I don't know. But the podcast company that I use sent a note out saying that I was in the top 10% of podcasts, which is, I think the thing to note is that the top 1% is a very different ball game to the top
It's
10.
probably like
But yeah,
Premier League in football,
it,
isn't
it really is. You know, you can be in the top 10% with, you know, 200 views, but the top 1% is kind of 100,000 views. So
it?
it's very.
What about international spread? Where are people
Yeah, so
coming?
I actually haven't looked at those stats for a couple of months, but when I did, it's very, I'd say it's around 70% UK.
Mhm.
And then I think the next largest was North America. But we're in all continents. We've got listeners in Africa, in Australasia, and yeah, Europe, North America, South America, no on Antarctica. But yeah, it's very splendid. It definitely has that global reach, which is quite nice.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I absolutely love it. So for the benefit of anyone watching this, just share your podcast details and I'll put it in the link with the video.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it is, you know, if you go to wherever you get your podcast, so you know, iTunes or Spotify, wherever, it's just called The Career Dad Show. But you can also go to careerdad.co.uk, and that's where there's all the links to the social networks. There's articles on either career stuff or dad stuff, and you can also listen to all of the podcasts on the website too.
Brilliant. Okay, so last but not least, what's your take, Dan, having gone through this whole evolution pre-pandemic and both as an employee and with your new venture as career dad? What's your take on the future of the world of work?
The future of the world of work, that is a big question. I think, so I've been thinking about this, and for me, I bucket work into one of three categories. So I'm either doing calls and meeting based, where it's very discussion based work. I'm either doing deep thinking work where I have the information, I need to be by myself and I need to create something, or I am doing collaborative, you know, blue sky thinking, you know, in my world, let's design some new journeys for websites, and I need a variety of people. Now, out of those three buckets, I would argue that the first two can not only be done remotely well, I think are better remotely. There is no need for, you know, what I talked about pre-pandemic was, if you're working from home, how do you make your virtual presence felt in a room of physical people? That's not the case anymore. You know, everyone has the same size tile on Zoom. Everyone has that same equal voice. And you know, as you'll be fully aware, if there's a meeting with 15 people in a room and 2 people dialing in, if the audio quality is bad for those 2 people, who cares? Because it's the 15 people in the room that are getting on with the meeting. That's no longer the case. So I'd argue that those conversational type meetings, that type of work, is better remotely. And obviously the deep thinking is much better remotely with that distraction-free environment. For me, I have yet to find a way to do collaborational work that is better remotely than it is in person. I just think I need those ideas to bounce off of physical people. So I think that's a better in person.
Is that because also you need the physical energy of the people?
I think so. You need people you need a whiteboard or whatever it is with everyone around it. And you need those kind of, you know, I don't want to say that kind of nuggy environment, but, you know, you need that kind of jokey, physical touch, and I don't know, you know, I think until virtual reality and augmented reality gets into a space that, you know, until you and I can put on a headset and we can feel like we're in the same room, which is coming, by the way, but until that's there, I don't think that that's ever going to replace that physical interaction. But if you think about those 3 buckets, well, two of them are better remotely and one of them is better in person, is my view, but they're not equally weighted that way. How often do you need to do that collaboration work? I think in my world, really, once every month, once every other month. Now there's a bit in there that is just around that general physical interaction and, you know, that the feels, as we'd say. But I just think I cannot imagine a world where I'm going to be in an office more than once a week, maybe twice a week. But that's very, very different from the 3, 4, 5 days a week that I was used to. So I think the future of work is going to be more remote and definitely more flexible. There are people who want to be in an office 5 days a week. For me, it's about creating the environment that best suits the individual, because ultimately that best suits the company too. I think the kind of the question that you asked, you could expand. What does this mean for talent? Can I apply for a job in Glasgow? Because it doesn't matter if I'm sat, can I apply for a job in Australia? Does it matter? I think that's quite interesting. What does that then do for hubs and city centres? What does that do for people's living? Why would I live in a small flat in London when I can do the job at the same salary, but live an hour away in a bigger house? Actually, what does that do for salaries? I've seen a recruiter who was talking around, they have a company who are offering 100% remote working, but you get paid 80% of salary of people who go into an office. What do people think about this? My personal view, that's absolutely shocking. I think let me know who that company is, because I never want to work for them in my life. But I know, right? But these are questions that are being asked. People are saying, well, if you don't have a big commute to pay for, you can afford less of. Yeah, so I think there's much bigger questions that are being asked. But in terms of the workplace physical space, I foresee a time where you're going to have a small pocket of space that is for people who want to and work best going to a place of work, sitting at a desk and getting on. I think the majority of workspace is going to be collaborative, hangout. It's going to look like Shoreditch. I think it's going to be, very open and collegiate and cool. I'm all for it.
Fascinating. And it's interesting what you're saying there, Dan, about you could work anywhere. You have a job in Australia, but we took a break recently and went down to the Kent coast, and apparently it's a big explosion in housing, because all of a sudden people are thinking, well, hang on a minute, I don't have to work in the suburbs of London anymore. If I'm working remotely, I can actually work I can buy a house down by the sea, by the coast, and actually have a better quality of life and standard of living. So that, as you say, this is a big question.
It's a big change. I've had a colleague who has moved from her flat in central London to Dorset. And she says, if I have to do that commute once a week for 3.5 hours, cool. Like, once a week, why not?
So things are definitely changing. Who knows what's going to happen? Anyway, it's been an absolute delight interviewing you, Dan.
Thank you.
And I think it's absolutely brilliant what you're doing. And initially this is going to go out to my LinkedIn Winning Through group members, and then it'll go out more broadly. And I wish you every success, both with your two hats.
Thank you very much.
So thanks very much for.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
All the best.
You too.
Cheers.
Bye.